Hello everybody, this is Rick from RITE, and in this training we're going to take you through label printing. So to access the label printing functionality, you need to be in Store Operations Manager, and it needs to be on a computer that has label printing set up, and I will go to Utilities, Add-ins, and we'll go to Print Labels. Okay, so we're going to start out with a really simple scenario. As odd as it might sound, RITE Label is actually a really sophisticated label printing tool, but it also can be used very, very simply. Actually, when you first look at this, you can see that there are 3 items in this queue down here. This is a label printing queue. RITE Label can be set up to sense what kind of labels you need so that as you're using the system, it automatically queues up labels. We're going to come back around to that, and for now we're just going to go to Tools. We're going to go to Item List, and here's a list of products, just like any other product list inside the system, and I can sort and search and find things in here the same way as I would anywhere else. I'm going to type in CAP, and now I found Captain Morgan, and now I can select one or more entries from this list. To select multiple entries, you can use Shift and Control just like you would in a lot of different types of grids, or you can just click and highlight, which is what I'm doing, and then I'll say OK. Alright, so when I did that, you can see that those items were added to my list. So now at this point I can just say print all, and it will print sticky labels for these products. You can see right here this drop down is showing the different types of labels I have set up in my test machine. You may have different labels. I have shelf tags, sticky labels, sale signs. You can set up a bunch of them. For most of you, you're going to have shelf tags, which is what you pop into your shelf channel, or sticky labels, which is what you put on the back of a bottle if it doesn't come with a barcode. So I'm just going to leave it at sticky label, and I'm going to say print all. Okay, and it printed all of those Captain Morgan items that I just added to my list. So if you just want to find an item and add it to the print queue and click print, you can do that. Really, really simple. Another very simple tool is Quick Scan. If I go back up to Tools and I go to Quick Scan, this allows you to search for products by scanning their barcode instead of searching through a list. For a lot of our customers, we'll actually set up this quick scan to work from the point of sale, the cash register, so that a cashier can get to this and print a label. So that's possible, but this allows you to do it with the barcode scanner instead of hunting through a list. Okay, so really easy. Find an item, print a label. Doesn't get much more simple than that. But let's talk about some of the more sophisticated things that the software can do. Alright, so let's take a look at this user interface here. Let's start with what we're seeing down here. There's a queue of items that the system wants to print labels for. Notice I had Captain Morgan in there previously, but once I printed those labels, they were removed. That's because of this little checkbox right here. Don't show me labels, or only show me labels, only show items where labels have not been printed. So soon as a label is printed for one of these entries, it gets removed from the queue. Technically, the system still remembers that you wanted to print a label for something, but it knows you printed it. You can see this little checkbox right here. And actually, I'm going to do something really quick. And what I'm going to do is, alright, so I uncheck this box so that it shows me labels that have been printed, and I've also enabled this date filter, so I said between yesterday and today, and now hey, there's those Captain Morgan items, and hey, the fact that they've been printed is checked. So you actually can look backwards if you want and see some of this stuff. Another simple little tip is, let's pretend that I'm going to add some items to the print queue that I don't actually want to print labels for. Okay, so I've got a bunch of stuff in here that maybe I don't really want to print labels for. you actually can also right click and you can say delete row. This gets it out of the queue permanently. It's gone, it's done, it's disappeared because I deleted it. I also can delete all rows, so everything that's visible, all 9 rows, you'll notice, if I right click and I say delete rows, it removes everything, and again, that's deleted from the queue at this point. Okay. Notice if I right click and say add items, it brings up that same search form that we looked at just a moment ago. So up here is a date time filter. I can disable the date time filter, meaning it's going to show me labels from all time that fit the criteria based on the rest of these filters. These are filters over here, these are filters right here as well. But I can enable it, so I could essentially go back in time and I potentially could see something that took place in the past. Okay, talking about things that happened in the past where that kind of idea might come in handy. So outside of just adding labels to a list and printing them, and by the way, you also can add labels to the queue by using your handheld, and there's a label printing functionality there. And basically all that does is just add them to the queue as a type of other. Okay, so if we look in this list right here, these are all of the different types of things we can have the system watch for, and when they happen, we can have it queue up a label. So for example, if I create a new item, here you can see here are 2 new items, and actually if I stretch this out a little bit, you can see these 2 items were added on 4/18 and approximately what time, and you can see the type is new. This is a new item. It automatically queued up labels for these products. This right here, this is a regular, which refers to a regular price change. And actually you can see if I check or uncheck this, it toggles what I see in this list. So it tracked the fact that on this item we changed the price from something to $4.99. So this is where the date time filters can be handy. If you want, if you accidentally print labels and something goes wrong with your label printer, it allows you to go back and reprint. And it also can make it so you can do a little bit of research. This tool is not built to track, when a price change happened for audit's sake. It's for label printing, but it does have some other uses. All right, so it can track regular price changes, sale price changes. It can track when something is received on a purchase order. So this PO QTYRTD, this stands for purchase order quantity received to date. That's when a purchase order is actually finally received. Not when you create a purchase order and add items to it, but when it's received. That's what that received to date is for. So when something is received, that can also create an action of when labels will be queued up. When MSRP pricing is changed, when an item lookup code is changed, when an item description is changed, all things that the system can track and queue up a label for if you want it to. The one that I skipped here is other. Okay, other are times where things are added to the queue and they don't fit into any of the other groups, which, by the way, there are more groups than this. I just haven't shown them to you yet. But things like if I do a lookup and I add 10 items to the queue just for fun, well, that's not a price change. That's not a new item. That's when we call it an other. And, notice when I first opened this tool up, by default, new items and regular price were the 2 that were checked. And when I went to tools and item list and I added one to this, notice it automatically checks the other at that point. Actually, it also marks it as user-defined values at the same time. We'll come back around to this. So why, when I first open it up, I'll exit out of this and we'll reopen it. So why are new items and regular prices checked, but none of these other ones are? It's really based on how the software is configured. So if I go to File and Configuration, there's actually, this is where we start getting into some of the additional sophistication, but you can really flex this program to do all kinds of interesting things. When I go to Auto Print, you can see new items is checked, and so a regular price is checked. This is what determines what the user interface looks like by default when I open it. If I were to uncheck this and say OK, and we'll exit, and now we'll reopen, notice regular price is no longer checked. I can check it if I want, but it's not checked automatically. So, you know, why go through all this trouble to allow it to be configured? So the reason why we made this so configurable is really this particular function is for two reasons. One is people print labels all the time. You know, stuff falls off the shelf, prices change, new products come in. I mean, all the time you're printing labels. So we made this very configurable to streamline the label printing process. When you open this up, we want to absolutely minimize the number of clicks it takes to get what you want to get. This allows you to do that. The second reason is because you're setting up defaults to what we call auto print. Okay, so a lot of our users use the user interface to interact with the label printing software, but technically you don't have to. You can actually set up a Windows scheduled task to occur every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, or every 24 hours, so that the queue of labels that's created automatically spits out. Nobody has to do a thing. Basically, it emulates the idea of opening up the user interface and clicking print all. Whatever happens then is what you can schedule to happen automatically. I'll give a couple examples of how people use this, and that, by the way, has to do with some of these other configuration options as well. But two examples that are commonly used with RITE Label are: one, in a multi-store environment, you schedule price changes to occur at headquarters. So let's say I've got 5 stores, and I determine that I want to change the prices on 10 items. So typically I'll schedule that price change to take effect outside of business hours, let's say 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, when you do that, traditionally what you had to do is you had to notify managers of those stores that the prices were going to change, and you had to tell them, hey, before the store opens, you need to print labels off. Well, with RITE Label, you could actually schedule it to run at 7:15, and when the manager shows up at 7:30, there would be price tags already printed out for new products and price changes. And now you've also just eliminated the step of needing to email them and tell them what's going on. The system's telling them what's going on. These settings down here also affect how the user interface opens when you first open it, and also how it acts when you auto print. So I'll pull this to the side a little bit. You can see right here it says number of labels per item. By default, when we open it up, a fixed quantity of 1. Notice the quantity field says 1 and it's grayed out, meaning I can't edit it. The reason why this is set this way is because that's the way I've set it in my configuration. If I were to change this to 2, or I were to set this to one of these other options, when you first open the program, this is what it would look like. And these checkboxes would be checked. So notice, labels that have not been printed, it's checked true. And so it is when the program opens. If I were to check this, it would reflect that when it opens. So let's do that one more time. All right, fixed quantity is 2. All the items on the screen have a quantity of 2. Another important point is that while that's the way it is by default when it first opens, that's not necessarily the way it has to be. I can check this box saying regular price change to bring up that item. I can go over here to fixed quantity and I can change it to 1, And when I do that, you know, all of these items change to a quantity of 1. I can do whatever I want once the screen's opened, and then I can print labels. But again, we're trying to get to that point where you've configured it so it's just the way you want it. You don't have to click around to make it act the way you want it to act. You open it up, you click print. That's really what we're after here. Okay, so we'll go back into this configuration and we'll talk about a few more things we were seeing. A couple of other filters here, or let's talk about the auto print label quantity, or number of labels per item. So we have fixed quantity of 1. That's where everything in the list is going to have a quantity of 1. We can also say stock on hand. Now notice it's 7, 0, and 0. Okay, so we're saying we want to print the quantity of items based on how many are in stock. At this point, we'll print 7 labels for this one, and 0 for this one, and 0 for this one. User-defined values. Notice how the background becomes white, and I can say I want 4 of these, I want 2 of these, and I want 0 of these. Now the user-defined value starts out at 0 for everything that gets added to the queue automatically. Okay, if I change a price or I create a new item, when it gets added to the queue, the default quantity will be 0. But if I add items to the list using quick scan or any manual, any option that's labeled as other, the default quantity for those is 1. Notice, other, quantity of 1 by default. Okay, these filters only show items where the reorder point is greater than 0. So if I check this, well, notice that there are 4 rows here. If I uncheck this, there are 6 rows. Okay, these are items where my minimum, my reorder point is greater than 0. Here's where this is valuable. Where we see it most often is in multi-store scenarios. So when people have multiple stores, you may have 5,000 products, but store A may only carry 1,000 of them. Store B, 2,500, and store C, all 5,000. So people will use the minimums and maximums, the reorder and restock points on your item, to designate which stores carry which products. If a store has a reorder point of 0, that means that store doesn't carry it. So the idea here is that if I change a price on an item that a store doesn't carry, why would I want a label printed for the shelf? It would just cause confusion for the store manager, whoever's putting out the labels. So you can enable this filter so that this queue only contains items that apply to the store. Another filter is only items with a quantity on hand greater than 0. So if we go back to stock on hand, we can see there's only 2 items here with a quantity on hand greater than 0. Well, they can be filtered in or out. And this kind of relates to customers that label all of their products. You know, even if they come with barcodes, maybe they need a price tag. You know, we have a gift shop that labels everything. Well, if I change a price on product and there's none in stock, I don't, you know, by definition, for those types of customers, I don't need any new labels. Okay, label types. You define this list, and you can, by the way, design your own labels. And again, this default is set to whatever you want via the configuration. So if I go to configuration and I go to printer, I set a default printer and I set a default label. Okay, so this is why it comes up as sticky label by default. Label rules is really super cool, and we'll come back to that in a second. It's great for customers that need it. Some people, a lot of people don't. One thing I wanted to cover really quick is on this auto print. Notice how the ones in black are familiar, right? They're in our user interface, but the ones in red, I don't see those in my list right now. So actually, we could go to item description and I could click this box and say toggle selected label to not appear on main form. I'm going to do that. It's gone. It immediately is gone, and if I click on something else, notice item description shows up in red. So we actually also track if aliases are updated if something is created newly on a purchase order, if it's about to be received, and if it's been actually received. We track price level A, B, and C changes. We track reorder point changes, sales start and end date changes, whether or not something was transferred. We track that as well. So outside of making this really point and shoot, allowing you to configure this thing to the teeth so that it makes it super fast and easy for somebody to print labels, we also realized, we were getting requests from customers, hey, could you track this? Could you track this? And the answer was, yeah, no problem, we can do that. And this list got really long. And most people could care less about quantity transferred and how that might impact how labels get printed. But for some people, it's vital. Well, when we add functionality, we want to be careful that we don't overcomplicate our applications. So this was our way to basically limit exposure to all kinds of crazy functions that people don't normally need. If you need it, turn it on. If you don't need it, hide it. That way when you have a cashier, or somebody who's not real computer sophisticated look at this, it's not overwhelming. I mean, there's quite a bit going on, but we try and limit that as much as we can. And then down at the bottom we have auto print schedule, so that when you click, when that task fires off, you can actually schedule it and it'll only print changes that have occurred during a certain period of time if you are going to schedule it to run automatically. Let's go back to printer. So you define your default printer. This is a label printer. You define a default label, or you can also use label rules. So if I go to the label tab, here's label rules. At the top, we've defined the different labels that the software is going to use. If I want to add a new label to this list, I say add new label, and then I browse, and typically that means I'm going to go to this path, C, Program Files, Microsoft Retail Management Systems, Store Operations, and then there's a folder called Labels. And inside that folder there's a whole bunch of label files. And you're allowed to create new ones using Store Operations Manager. You can create a new label that looks totally different and has different information on it. So you just pick your new label. I'll grab this one just for fun. And it pulls the name out of the label file, but you can change that if you want to give it your own flavor of name. And then we choose whether we want it to use the default printer, or we can say for this label, I want it to go to a different printer. Where this can be really cool is these sticky labels, for example, spit out of a Zebra label printer. It's one label at a time, which in most cases is great. But what if you wanted to print Avery labels? Those come out on a sheet of paper. So I could determine that, hey, when it's one of these it's one of these Avery printers, I want this to go to my laser printer instead. And the system will automatically respect that. It will know, hey, you've chosen an Avery label, we're going to spit the print job out to a different printer. You can also have the system prompt you for a start label position, and this specifically also relates to sheets, where there might be 50 labels on a sheet. Well, if you print one label and there's 49 left, you don't want to have to throw that away. So if you check this box when you start printing, it'll ask you where do you want to start, and then you say start on the second label and it will start there. So handy. Another way I've seen this used is, going back to either we have customers that are a wine shop or a gift shop where, in a gift shop scenario, they'll have jewelry tags where they're like butterflies where they wrap around a ring, and they might have a regular label and they might have yet a third label. So for those people who print lots of different types of labels, or in a wine shop where you're printing shelf tags and you're printing sticky labels, you could use the same label printer, but you have to swap out labels, and it can be inconvenient, especially if you're printing off two different types of labels very, very often. So for those people, a lot of times we'll set up two different label printers, and then you just leave one type of label in each, and then depending on the type of label needed, it'll automatically be directed to the correct label printer. You can also edit a selected label, so I can select this and I can say edit, and basically it allows me to change the default printer, the name, etc. I can delete a label from this list, and then the last option is refresh selected label. This is kind of important. So when you select a label and add it to RITE Label as one you want to print, if you update the label file, let's say you modify a font or you make the price bigger, well, that change won't automatically take place in RITE Label. You'll actually need to click this, and you'll need to say refresh selected label, and then you say yes, and it actually goes to this folder location where it originally found it, and it takes the data out of the label file and brings it back into the database. So all these labels are stored in the database. The reason why we do that is because a lot of people use this software on multiple computers, so we don't want to be reliant on a physical file on a computer. Instead, it's in the database. We can use it from anywhere, if that makes sense, without getting too technical. Okay, so label rules. With label rules, you can actually make RITE Label determine the type of label that needs to be used in a given situation. In a beer, wine, liquor store, most people don't need to use label rules. They just pick the type of label that they want when they want it. I want a sticky label right now, or I want a tag. Pretty straightforward. But in another scenario, like a gift shop, where going back to this idea of jewelry, I've got jewelry, I've got Christmas ornaments, and I've got books. Well, in a gift store, they probably tag all of their own stuff. I put my logo on the tag, and I put my price on the tag, and everything gets a tag. So, we've seen a little bit already how RITE Label can be used when a purchase order is received. So when a gift shop receives a PO, they may want labels printed for everything, but there's a problem. I want a jewelry tag on my jewelry. I want a normal tag on my ornaments and miscellaneous stuff, and I want no tag for books. Books already have a price, they already have a barcode. This is where label rules really are perfect. So I can say add a new rule, and I can say if, and I've got lots of different qualifiers, if the department is spirits, then use this type of tag. And I can add it. Okay, so I have a number of different rules. I can reorder their priority, and I can also say if the label, or if the product fits none of these rules, then I'll use this other label. And that works great, especially if you have multiple label printers. It'll just start spitting out labels out of 3 printers all at once. It's pretty neat to see. If you don't have 3 label printers, you actually can check this box, and in between each run of labels, it will stop and it will tell you, hey, I'm about to print sticky labels. Please tell me when it's okay to proceed. And by the way, I'm going to print 100 of those. So you put the sticky labels in, you hit a button, and it goes. And then it stops and says, I'm about to print shelf tags. Put the shelf tags in, hit OK. This only applies to label rules, though, by the way. So really flexible stuff here. If I go back to add a new rules, I don't want to get in this too much, but if I say advanced rules, I can actually create a more advanced rule. I can say department is greater than exactly, we'll say beer. I can add that filter, and then I can decide a label quantity too. I can say when it's a we had a home improvement store where they wanted, if it was a lamp, they wanted 2 labels plus 1. So I could actually say, so I've got these tags, quantity on hand, UDQ. So I could say quantity on hand times 2 minus 1. So when it's part of this, then do this. So I could actually have multiple actions take place for one rule too. If it's beer, then do this and do this. Print shelf tags and sticky tags. I mean, really, really flexible stuff here. Pretty cool when you need it. Okay. On the database tab, this is just your normal connection information. I'm not going to get into the configuration of this, but I just want to mention that if you're in a multi-store situation, you can connect this to headquarters, and if you do, then these HQ label printing and future price change functionalities come alive. So I actually can see a price change worksheet in my print queue before the price change takes effect. The reason why that's good, and again, this is only multi-store, but if I have price changes that are going to happen next week that haven't taken place yet, in a multi-store environment, I potentially could print those off today without waiting. By the way, the wizard, the import wizard, you actually can take an RMS report and export its XML. So we've kind of talked so far about how RITE Label predicts when you're going to need labeled, new items, regular prices, and you can also, you know, randomly go in and say, hey, I want these items, I want to print these items. But what if you wanted to relabel everything in the tequila category? How would you do that? Well, what we've seen so far, there's no good way to do that. But there is using this wizard. So you actually can run an RMS report, and I won't get too, reporting is another subject here. Let's get a bunch of data in here. So with RMS's reporting engine, I can filter I can do all kinds of crazy filtering. I can say, show me all red wine that was sold in the last 6 months for over $45 a bottle. I mean, I can slice and dice this any way I want. And when I do that, I can right click and say export, and I can say a file, and then I can choose XML. And when I do that, this file that comes out, you actually can use this wizard to import that file to print labels for everything inside that report. That gives you a really easy way to make it so that you can print labels for just about any group of things. Okay. Alright, so the two last tabs here, PO and XFR or transfer. What this purchase order transfer tab does is it allows you to configure the software so that when you're receiving a transfer, it will automatically, receiving a transfer or a purchase order, it will automatically prompt you to print labels. So it says after committing a transfer, prompt to print labels. Basically what the software will say is, hey, you've received a purchase order, would you like to print labels now? And you can actually tell it to use a special filter. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to say where bin locate, actually let's say item lookup code contains NB, and instead of printing off a shelf tag, I want a sticky label. So here's how this works. When you receive a purchase order through RMS, it would prompt you to print labels, and the list of products it would bring up are only items where the item lookup code contains NB. Now if you're one of our clients, you know that we recommend when you have a product that has no barcode from the manufacturer, you start it off with an NB, meaning no barcode. So it would filter out this specific group of products, and it would prompt you to print labels for only those products, and it would suggest that you use a sticky label specifically in that case. So pretty slick way of accomplishing this. Now in order for this to work, you must receive through RMS. You cannot do the receiving through Advanced PO, which is another one of our tools. If you do it through Advanced PO, it still works very well, but you just have to come to the RITE Label interface as a second step and look for the purchase order quantity received, and that will do the trick. Okay, the last tab, options. So this is a bunch of miscellaneous options that relate to the program. For example, if you're using quick scan with a barcode scanner, you may want it when you scan it, every time you scan it adds one to the grid, or you may want it to move focus into the quantity text box. So the difference is you may only want one label, one label, one label every time you scan, or if you set it like this, then after you scan, it will go into the quantity field, so you can say I want 5 of these, scan. I want 6 of these, scan. This relates to the defaults that appear right here. So if I uncheck this, then this would become unchecked. If I say only show date, then right now where it says date and time, it would only show the date and not the times. The times just give you more granular control over what you see in the grid. If you want to use price per unit, meaning you could have a label show per milliliter or per pound or per ounce, it doesn't really matter. It can work any which way you want, but this is where you configure where the software looks for size and kind of gives you an explanation of how to use it a little bit. I'm not going to get too far into that in this training video. But you can have the program list out how much stuff costs per milliliter or whatever you want. You have to put in your sizes very consistently for this to work, but it works great. The last couple things down at the bottom are show print preview. So notice so far when I've told it that I want to print, it just prints. You know, it doesn't prompt you, it doesn't give you any more prompts, and again, for most of our customers, reducing the number of clicks is very important. For some of our customers, it's not, though. I enabled that, so now when I say print, notice now it's prompting me for a printer selection. It didn't do that before, and now when I say print, now it's showing me a print preview. Some people, that's very handy. Other people, it's more clicks, and they don't really care. They know it's going to print out okay. But it's up to you. You toggle it on and off. Send separate print jobs for each item. This relates to certain type of label printers that are a little old school. You need to check this. And then you also have the ability, if the price is a round number, remove the decimal places. So we have a customer or a couple of customers where all of their prices are $5 or $6 or whatever, the dollar stores. They don't want it to say $1.00. They just want $1. So that's also possible. Okay. All right. So that there's more to show. And by the way, if you click help, it'll bring up a help guide that works out pretty well. One of the things you should check out in here is the enhanced label designer functionality. So RMS, when you're designing labels, has a set number of fields, but RITE Label greatly expands upon those fields. Almost anything relating to the product can be printed on a label, from sale pricing to sale start and end dates. You know, things you don't get with factory RMS, you can add them to the label using this enhanced label information. Even like an encrypted date. If you want to print today's date on a label, but you want it to be something that only you can read and not a customer, we can do that kind of stuff. So anyway, that summarizes RITE Label. I hope you've enjoyed the training. Thanks.